So my name is Patrick O'Donnell. I'm a reporter for the Education News and Analysis website, the 74 Million. I was a former education reporter for the Plain Dealer, but I've been with the 74 Million for the last few months. I am here with a couple of state legislators and a couple of local superintendents. We want to talk about the reopening of school this year. It's clearly going to be a very difficult one with a lot of questions on the table. Both about safety and about catching kids up from the school closures in the spring. So there's an awful lot of issues to go through. So what I'd like to do is I'm going to ask each of the four folks who are joining me on the panel to introduce themselves. If both of the legislators, if you want to start, Mr. Skindell, that would be great.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting this to try to get the word out about what's happening with our schools as we enter the month of August. I am a state representative, Mike Skindell. I represent the Cleveland Municipal School District as well as the Lakewood School District. So that encompasses my state rep district. But when I was in the Senate, I had also represented Parma and Brooklyn and some other parts of Berea school districts. But as we start moving forward, I think we are still in the territory of unknown. Just the recent press conferences from Governor DeWine when addressing what's happening with the schools, it is going to be dependent a lot on the track of the spread of the virus. Right now, it is not looking good. So many of the districts around the state are starting to submit plans on how they're approaching it. A number of districts have moved the start date back a little bit until after Labor Day to give teachers more time to prepare their classrooms. We see around the state staggered school schedules where some students will be in 2 or 3 days a week and other students will be in 2 or 3 days a week. And it varies upon the school districts. At the state level, and Senator Manning can help address this also. One of the biggest things is we are responsible for funding. As we know, because of the coronavirus, the state funds have taken a hit, which means school district funds have taken a hit. Just recently, in the last week or so, the state of Ohio has started the process of releasing $100 million of federal CARES Act to the school districts to help them prepare with the school districts reopening. Those dollars are there to help prepare the reopening and making sure that there's a safe and healthy environment for the students that are going to school. With that, I'll save additional comments for later.
Okay, Mr. Manning.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Nathan Manning, State Senator for the 13th District, which is a little west of Cleveland and Cuyahoga County. It includes all of Lorain County and all of Huron County. I do not have an education background, so I'm thankful that we have some educators and superintendents on this panel, but I do have a law background. I practiced law in North Ridgeville and was a prosecutor for a few years as well. I served 2 terms in the House, and both those terms I was on the Education Committee. I'm currently in my first term in the Senate and serve on the Senate committee. So it's definitely a passion of mine. Part of that passion comes from, many teachers in my family that or many family members that are teachers, including my mom, who's a retired teacher, and also my wife, who is a teacher at Lakewood. So definitely in all of your neck of the woods in Cuyahoga County. So, while certainly not an expert, it's a passion of mine. I try to listen to the experts on these issues. And at the state level, what we're trying to do as we're opening back up is get that local input, get that local control to all those school districts, because we know everybody's a little bit different, but also give a little bit of guidance from the state to try to help rather than mandate. We certainly want to balance, education and learning. We know that's, if done correctly, is done in person usually, but we also want to balance that with obviously the health and wellness for the students and the teachers and administration. So that's obviously the huge hurdle that we're going to be talking a lot about tonight. And hopefully we can find that happy medium where we can achieve both. So thanks for having me.
Thank you. Any of the superintendents want to go first?
Ms. Kirby, we'll defer to you. Okay. Liz Kirby, Superintendent of Cleveland Heights University High School District. Rounding out my very first year as a superintendent, who would have imagined a pandemic on top of all the other challenges of our district, including Ed Choice, where we are the most severely impacted district in the state in Ed Choice. It's really fun to have budget challenges while you're also planning for a pandemic. Nothing better than that, let me tell you. So we are really planning for the reopening of the school, knowing that we have a lot of different needs and desires for the families in our district. We also pushed back the start of our school day to September 2nd so that we would have time to plan. We have models for families in grades pre-K to 12 that are in many ways based upon the needs of students. So for our pre-K students, we will have half-day instruction, and we will be abiding by the minimum number of students that are allowed in those classrooms in order to serve them. So there'll be half days, some time for cleaning, and then another half day throughout the week in our sites. For our K-5 students, currently we're offering both an in-person and blended model of choice for our families. Although as we learn more and more about the county's level of alert, the possibility of offering 5 days right off at the start of the school year is starting to become challenging just because of the spread in Cuyahoga County, but we're still assessing parent interest in that model. Our blended model in general would mean that students come to school 2 days a week. There would be time for teacher planning on that Wednesday and kids would be out. And so for 3 days, students would have blended instruction. So that is a model that we also have for our students. And then we have 2 online options for our families. One is through a program called Ohio Online that is administered through the ESC, where essentially students can select online instruction and go through it at the pace that meets their needs. We also are developing a homegrown online school for our students, My School Online, that will have our teachers teaching students, following a schedule similar to the schedule that they follow during the day. It is just all remote. Like a lot of superintendents, we are going to be using the county's 4 levels in order to determine really what's appropriate to offer. So for example, and I'm sure Charlie has the same thing, at level 4, we will all go remote. At level 1, they're pretty confident all kids can come back in between, and are trying to determine what levels 2 and 3 mean as it relates to the county alert system. And so this is definitely an August task that we are engaged in right now. And everything, as you say, as the science changes, as the guidance changes, we refine our plan more and more.
Okay, I'd like to clarify a couple things before we move on. Is when you're talking about the youngest students coming for a half day, are you talking about some kids come in the morning and other kids come in the afternoon?
Yes, for our pre-K students.
Okay, very good. And then if the risk levels go high and the rating bumps up to more risk, and you're going to move to online, are you moving them into the ESC online program or the homegrown online program?
It would be a better transition into the homegrown program, because really it would be the teacher just moving their instruction online, following the same curriculum and schedule. So we have some students and families that are going to start with that right away, and other families that will choose the blended option.
Okay, you're offering that basically as a program within the district. You're not creating a separate school for that.
Exactly, it's within the district, exactly.
Okay, that sounds great. Parma School District, what's your plan?
Well, we're very similar to Cleveland Heights, all the way down to the fact that we too have been very hurt by Ed Choice, and we'd love to always mention that in front of our state legislators and hope that we can have a equitable resolution to some of those discrepancies, especially those that came up this year. Moving on to this fall, very similar. We will be, levels 1 and 2 will be traditional, so we'll have 5 days of instruction. Level 3, we move into the hybrid where it's a 1-2-2 model for our students. So Mondays will actually be the really intervention enrichment time. We want teachers to be able to prep our students essentially for what's going to happen during the week. And so that'll happen on Mondays. Cohort A, which is the first half of the alphabet, will be on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Cohort B will be on Thursdays and Fridays. again, very similar to the Cleveland Heights model. We also offer the virtual option for families who simply can't fathom sending their students back. And actually, as of last count, we have approximately 9,700 students enrolled in the district. As of today, we've had about 750 enrolled in the virtual option. So that's a pretty robust number that, quite frankly, we probably expect to grow, especially if Cuyahoga County is going to go into level 4 in the coming weeks. Level 4 would be fully virtual, but again, if you're opting into the bricks and mortar option, you're going to have to be flexible as a family to be able to sort of come and go with the levels. And we've announced that we will check that state system, which announces on Thursday afternoons, and whatever the code is, that's what we are for the following week. So we'll finish out Friday in whatever level we had been, but if we accelerate from a level 3 to a level 4, then we will go fully virtual the next week with the potential to come back. We recognize that that's going to be, again, requiring some flexibility on behalf of our families, but if they don't want to be flexible, if they want to say, hey, we've got to lock into something, then they can certainly choose the virtual option as well. The virtual option will be a 1 semester commitment. We are staffing this with our own teachers, similar to how Elizabeth mentioned. We may have some AP classes or some sort of singletons at the high school where we're going to have to tap into an outside resource for the curriculum, but our goal and our commitment is really to use our Parma teachers. So as we staff this, we're not going to be able to afford students moving back and forth, and that's the reason for the semester commitment.
Okay, so that is families that want to use the online option primarily need to commit for a semester, but
That's correct.
students who do the in-person hybrid option can be bumped to fully online.
That's correct. They're going to be shifting based upon the county's level, rating level.
Okay. Can a family decide a month, 6 weeks into the semester that I'm done with sending my kid in? I'm not comfortable. I want them to do online only here on out.
Yeah, I mean, it's always going to be difficult to say no to a family, but our expectation is that by August 3rd, you're going to weigh your options and you're going to commit to one program or the other. And our families seem to have understood that. We're not getting a whole lot of frustration about the semester commitment. They seem to be comfortable with that, actually.
Okay, very good. So I'll go back to the legislators for a minute. Let's talk about funding. So Governor DeWine did a little trim on each district before the end of fiscal year 20. I understand that he's hoping not to do trims in fiscal year 21, but they're withholding some funds from districts while they wait and see what happens. So 2 legislators, what do you think is going to happen with funding for this upcoming school year? And I mean, what do you think is going to happen and what do you want to happen?
Senator, you want to take that first?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously, what I want to happen is to have no future cuts and obviously keep all school districts whole. That's certainly the goal. Thankfully, we have a rainy day fund. We've had a lot of funding coming in from the CARES Act and different sources there that we've allocated some. We still have more to allocate. There's talk of the HEROES Act that I know is over in the U.S. Senate. So there are funding options out there. Obviously, a lot of it is wait to see in terms of revenue, how much revenue is coming in. What happens with this pandemic? Are we going to have more shutdowns or anything along those lines? So it's hard to predict completely what will happen, but I know everybody's goal is to keep all school districts whole, hopefully increase funding through the CARES Act and other methods. And hopefully we'll have the school districts in good shape.
Well, so if say the CARES, so the new act is HEROES. So if HEROES passes and a whole influx of money comes in from the federal government, will that basically give the state freedom to cut aid to districts to cover other budget problems?
Sorry, Representative, but I think everything's on the table. Obviously, when you're looking at a budget, you're trying to make everything work. But I certainly don't want to. And part of that was the trim that we did that you mentioned. Obviously, if you look at the numbers, while some school districts specifically lost some money, other school districts actually received a little bit more money. So, you want to look at those numbers and make sure the school districts have sufficient money to be able to do everything they need to do to keep everybody safe and to educate, the children. So, I hate to go into specifics about, are we going to take some money from here and cut from there? Any budget, as Representative Skindell will say, is difficult, and especially during if there is a recession or with the pandemic. Everything's on the table, but at the end of the day, we want to keep all school districts whole, and hopefully the federal government will help us with that.
So my concern, if I could chime in here, my concern is under the new appropriation bill that is being considered by the U.S. Congress. I have not seen components of that going into schools at all. The good thing is we did have the CARES Act. That was just pushed out by the controlling board a week ago. That was $100 million to the schools. We do have the rainy day fund. The governor has mentioned that he's as we move into the new fiscal year, he's tapping into the rainy day fund to cover those things that need to be covered. And I know that education is at the top of priority of the governor as well as of the legislators. The concern is you still had schools will continue. They will have an ongoing reduction of money. The concern is some school districts can get by with that reduction. Other school districts, even with the money that they had, they were unable to fill the soap dispensers in the bathrooms. They were unable to fill the paper towel dispensers in the restrooms. So when in normal times they're unable to do that, my concern is for the health and safety of the kids. How are we going to make sure that things are going to be sanitized in these schools that have historically been on the borderline? How are we going to make sure that the restrooms, soap dispensers, and paper towel dispensers are filled all the time? And that where dividers have to be put in, the plexiglass dividers have to be put in, those are put in, where we actually have the ability to provide the staff to ensure, when kids get together, and the superintendents can talk about this, when the kids get together, they like to get together. And how are you going to keep the social distancing, which is one of the criteria of the Department of Education in the state of Ohio, when you have these kids together, and maybe one instructor and maybe an aide in a classroom. It is going to be tough in many of these scenarios. The other thing is schools not only provide that education, but in many places they provide mental health programming. They provide nutrition, lunches and things like that at the schools. How are we going to make sure that the kids are fed that rely upon those school nutrition programs? Those are big challenges.
Speaking of mental health, so the governor's only funding increase for schools this budget round was for his wellness dollars. Are those at risk for next school year?
I know that the governor, that has been a priority of the governor, and it's a priority of the legislature to try to keep those intact. However, we don't know where this virus is taking us. I know here in my own community, just recently, some businesses had to shut down because of infection within their own business. That's going to impact tax revenue. I think you're going to see that ebb and flow as we move into the fall. There may be times that the virus is not spreading as much, but right now we're in a period that it is spreading. We don't know what the future holds. And the governor just this weekend, talked about, there may be some consideration of some shutdowns in some areas. So we'll have to see how those loss of tax revenues at that stage will impact the schools and those programs for mental health and those wraparound services.
So another big issue for both of the legislators is testing, state testing, which is always a big deal. We're going to get report cards that don't have test results on them in a couple months. Do you want state testing this year? Should it happen? Should it not happen?
So on, Senator, if I could take this offhand.
Or
So just a couple weeks ago in the House, one of the last actions the House took was to pass Representative Manning's legislation to reduce some of the testing. And I think that's important. That's been a call. But some of the basic testing out there, we need to keep in place. We need to continue to know whether the kids are, when they're getting education in class or whether they're doing it at home, whether they're getting that education. We need some benchmark, and some testing is appropriate. I have supported the efforts over the years to cut back on some of it, but we need to still keep some of that in place.
Okay, Mr. Manning, any thoughts about the testing?
in general, I'm not a huge fan of standardized testing, as Representative Skindell said. My mom had a bill, or has a bill that passed the House that reduces testing. There are some federal requirements that are tied to funding, so obviously don't want to lose that funding. I actually have a bill that I'm joint sponsoring. The co-sponsor request just went out, and it's with Senator Feder, who's the ranking member on education, to extend the moratorium for COVID-19 through this school year. So, you know, it's something that's, in my opinion, should be done and will likely be done anyway. You might as well give the school districts a little bit of a head start on the fact that they don't have to be, doing, this testing and have those requirements. Basically, it's what we did in 197 and 164 for last school year and extending it through this school year. So, yeah, certainly I understand there needs to be some sort of accountability and everything along those lines. The school districts, I think, are in the best position to do that. And I think if anything good comes out of this pandemic, a lot of what we're doing right now, a lot of people in Columbus are talking about local control and allowing school districts to do what's best for their students. And hopefully we can look at doing more of this that we've done in the short term because of COVID-19 for the future.
Okay, so back to the superintendents. I'd like to understand the safety measures you're going to be using in your schools when kids come back. You may have talked a little bit about them, different amounts, both of you. What are you requiring for masks? Are there face coverings? What are you requiring for distance? How are you handling distance on buses? And how are you handling distance on playgrounds? And are you putting dividers in your buildings to keep kids separate? What steps are you taking about safety?
Elizabeth, you want me to start this time?
Yeah, you can start.
Quite a bit, actually. We put some dollar figures to the expenses to this point. We're actually at $973,000 in measures that we've taken to prepare our schools for COVID. And as we walk through this, it's going to kind of start to answer all of those questions you just asked. We have bought reusable masks for all students. We bought disposable masks in large bulk, knowing that the reality is sometimes our students aren't going to come back the next day with their reusable mask. We bought plexiglass. We probably need to buy more plexiglass, in all honesty. As our secretaries come back, I think there's going to be a pretty high demand. Folks are going to say, my workstation is the one that needs the plexiglass, and we're probably going to need more than, I think we have 8 or 10 per school right now.
Well, are you using plexiglass to separate kids, or just?
We are not using plexiglass to separate kids. We have it in a high volume areas. For instance, our sign-in desks, where we know you're going to get a good deal of traffic. It's really going to be up to the principals to work with their staffs to designate what a high volume area is, but it's not to separate students. We have bought approximately $370,000 in desks to replace tables. We know that tables have been sort of a movement of late. It allows for maybe a little bit more collaborative environment, more lab setting, so to speak. We can't as easily socially distance tables, so we're replacing those with desks. That's been a large expense. On the buses, to answer your question specifically about transportation, when we're in a hybrid, and in all honesty, I sort of, and there's no science to this, but I almost feel like we're going to kind of settle into that level 3 in Cuyahoga County. And when we are in a hybrid, it's going to be relatively easy to socially distance on buses or any other setting, because you're really at half capacity. That's the whole idea of that cohort model. We had a webinar about a week ago now with the Cuyahoga County Board of Health, and of all of the different conversations we've had, that was really probably the most practical, the most applicable to what we're doing. They talked about the recommendation is 1 child per seat, but they also know that, that's not going to be possible in all areas. So when you can't have maybe optimal social distancing, you have other measures. You have face masks, you have hand sanitizer. We have bought hundreds of $1,000s worth of hand sanitizer. Not only the sanitizer itself, but the dispensers, the locations. So we'll have that widely available. We'll have it in every classroom. Our function really of the next really 6 weeks, and we delayed our start to the Tuesday after Labor Day, is to our experience to be very similar to what when I walk into the corner Heinen's, and I'm going to be socially distanced. There's going to be hand sanitizer everywhere. There's going to be X's on the floor telling us where to line up. It's those types of measures that we are replicating in our school district.
So you were talking about one child per seat on the bus, but you'll have a student in the seat right in front and right behind them.
Correct.
And that's not 6 feet.
Correct.
So
Correct.
Going with the 3 feet or the 6 feet? Is that you comfortable with the 3 feet?
We are. And again, that's where the County Board of Health, I thought they had great advice saying, listen, our best performance is 1 per seat, but we know that you can't get there. So when you can't take those measures, what else are you going to do to make sure students are safe? And that's hand sanitizer on all the buses. That's Clorox 360, which we're going to fog all the buses with after their runs. Clorox 360 kills 99% of its bacteria within 5 seconds. We're going to fog those buses. We're going to fog our classrooms. So yeah, we're not going to get to the ideal of 6 feet on our buses. It will be easier to socially distance students when we are in the hybrid. And again, that would be level 3. And we anticipate a good percentage of our school year, at least in this first semester, being that way.
And I would say similar structures as in Parma, but I want to tie this back to the question about budget. We lost our district $5 million this past year in unanticipated funds due to the Ed Choice Scholarship Program. We had $300,000 cut out of our budget this past spring because students that take the Ed Choice Scholarship were counted in our ADA, average daily attendance. So even though those students never attended our district, we lost an additional $300,000 just because they were counted in our enrollment. And it makes it very difficult to, now that we're in a pandemic, to provide all the things that we have to have in place in order to keep our students and our staff safe. Ohio, in this Ed Choice program, has a unique quagmire for districts. It is terribly unfair, and it is really crippling. And I know it can be difficult for legislators who may not be aware of what that really feels like, but we had to fire 24 people at the end of the year before we even got the state cuts, knowing that it would be a challenging year. And to the
your CARES money, how much did your CARES money offset what you lost from the state?
Our CARES money went to cover salaries in the spring.
Well, okay, but your salaries wouldn't have changed, right?
Right, but there was a cut in our state funding. So we got CARES money, then we got a cut in state funding. Now we recently got another infusion of several $100,000 once that money was opened up again, but it's not enough to meet the needs that we have in our district. And we know we're not alone. We know we're not alone in this. And it's really important that legislators have an understanding of how we're talking about basic safety. And by the way, when you can't provide for that, there's no way that you can hold schools accountable for state. You just can't do it. You're not giving schools and students and families the funds in order to create environments where that would be even close to fair for schools and for students and districts.
Should we test anyway and just remove some of the accountability, the negative penalties and things that happen when tests don't go well?
I think the testing for instructional purposes is appropriate, but we also have our own internal tests that we use as a district in order to get that information. Go ahead, Charlie.
I was similar to what you were going to say. The reality is the way that testing has been set up in Ohio, there is no instructional purpose at this point. The instructional purpose of state tests, when you have results that come 3 and 4 months later, and I know we've sped up that timeline slightly, so maybe now we're 2 months later, the only aim and the only end of testing has been political, and it has been to drive families further and further away from urban cores. I've often said that state testing is the academic equivalent of Route 422. It's a reason and a means to move people away from inner cities. So while the notion of saying, should we just test to see how students are doing, we do that on our own. We have
Exactly.
Ames Web, we have reading
NWA.
programs and
That's right.
and benchmarking that we do, nationally normed reference tests. To say that we're just going to use it and see how kids are doing, that will not be the reality. There will still be charts that are published in widely publicly available forums that show, your top socioeconomic school districts performing up here and your lower socioeconomic school districts performing down here, and it'll just be used as a club once again. So I didn't mean to make this a political speech, but when you said, should we just do it for, to see how kids are doing, that's never how it's used, and we wouldn't anticipate it would change in this circumstance.
Yeah.
Okay, so for Cleveland Heights University Heights, what safety measures are we going to see in place? What are you doing with masks? What are you doing about transportation?
Yeah.
How's that working?
Similar to Parma, masks required for all students. For transportation, we'll aim for 1 in a seat, but if necessary, we'll have to go with 2 in a seat. Again, we don't have the funds to do more than that. We will have cleaning protocols, cleaning supplies. We purchased the hand sanitizer. We have the plexiglass for the office areas and as needed throughout the district. My moment of excitement last week was when my director of business operations shared a new cleaning machine where our cleaners can put a backpack on and disinfect classrooms with the spray very quickly, because the Clorox 360 materials are actually very difficult to get right now nationwide. So there's a run on those. So we have another solution to that as well. 6 feet of distancing outside as much as possible. Measuring desks, looking at the furniture, seeing if you can switch in furniture. Charlie's right, tables are really difficult. The small desks are a lot better for providing for that safety as well.
So when you say masks for all students, even pre-K?
Even pre-K, we know that'll be difficult. We know that we'll have to do a lot of teaching and culture building around those pieces. And our teachers are equipped and ready for that. They have an understanding of that. Those classrooms are small, about 9 students too, so that'll assist with that as well. But it's something that's really, really important. It's important for families. It's important for our staff who are preparing to return as well.
Are either of your school districts moving classes into things like gyms and the cafeterias?
We are not, only because those have other purposes. Our cafeterias are used half of the day, really. So, potentially in the morning, there could be some flexibility there. In the afternoon, it's typically being cleaned after lunch. We are encouraging teachers to take students outside if possible. We know that, the virus is more or less easily transmitted outside. But again, that's going to be weather dependent, and there's no specific structure in place for that.
Okay, and in the Heights, you're going to do any classes outside?
As many as possible, for sure. First of all, give kids a break from the mask, and our staff a break from the mask as well. And if needed, common spaces. It kind of depends upon the type of model that we're in as we go up the levels as well.
Okay, we've got a question from folks about sports. If budgets are so tight, why, and you can't really afford all this, as many safety measures as you want and all the core things, why do sports?
Elizabeth, you want that, or you want me to take it?
Well, I can start, and you can help me. Sports is really an important developmental part of the experience of students in schools, and we know it builds skills that last a lifetime for students. It's something that's been very challenging because we could not offer that in the spring, and we did begin the fall training over the summer when we were allowed to do that by the state's orders. Having said that, we're all really trying to wait and see what those protocols will look like as we start sports for the fall. The Ohio Athletic Association has decided that this is a decision that each individual, all 613 districts, are to decide if they're going to offer sports or not. So that presents certainly a very unique challenge. And it is something that we'll be working, quite frankly, in coordination with the districts from the first ring that Charlie and I are both in, and also Northeast Ohio, as we make that decision about fall sports.
Yeah, and I would add, much of what Elizabeth talked about. The notion that, sports are this really large expenditure. I mean, we spend approximately 2.5% of our general fund actually goes to sports. I mean, our coaches, and I'm thankful for the work that they do and the dedication they show to our athletes. But I mean, they make probably about $10 an hour if you were actually to divide it out. So the supplementals are very low. We do have some costs in terms of bus, in terms of transportation. But again, that's not a large expenditure, 2.5% of our budget. So the more interesting question, and I think we're all wrestling with this as superintendents right now, is, where's the equity? And I agree that sports is very important. I mean, our numbers right now are up dramatically for our fall sports, in large part because the students were ready to come back and do something. And sports was an important outlet for them to have interaction with their peers again, to have a structure to their day, to have, some conditioning. The issue for me has become, how are we going to say that, cohort A, you have school on Tuesday and Wednesday. Oh, but by the way, cohort B, you have volleyball practice or football practice or soccer practice at 2:45. I think that's where we're all struggling with this. I sort of compared it today to almost a game of chicken with the governor. I feel like he really is probably under a lot of pressure to not cancel fall sports, but we're starting to feel just the really, it's a kind of ironic type of message we're going to send if we're going to go ahead with fall sports while we're on a hybrid model, or gosh forbid, while we're on a shutdown model. I think we're all sort of looking at each other thinking, does this make sense to you? Does it make sense to you? And we are having some conversations about, what does a decision look like in terms of sort of regionalizing and making that decision together?
Are you trying to keep your cohorts completely separate so that if there's an outbreak between students, it doesn't cross between the two cohorts?
Our cohorts will be separate, yes. Again, that Tuesday, Wednesday is one group, and Thursday, Friday is the other. The other piece that I would say is we're allowing families to opt in to the opposite cohort if they have multiple children in the house with different last names. And we know that, in the Near suburb, that's a very, common piece. We have a lot of blended families. I myself am part of a blended family. So if you have, 3 different last names and you want to align it to one cohort, we encourage you to do that so that you have consistency in your family, and so that we're limiting, the cohort to that one household as opposed to mix matching it.
So if you've got athletic teams for the entire school that are practicing and playing together, that kind of blows the cohort separation.
That's a great point as well. And that's very similar to that's one more consideration for us to take into account.
I mean, it's not clear if the NFL is really coming back. You know what I mean? Like it's, there are many colleges that have canceled, fall football. I'm not quite sure. Well, it's quite political and popular in Ohio, as in a lot of states. So I'm sure that's what's behind the hesitance. I don't know if our colleagues that are in the private leagues or the Catholic leagues, how they're making those decisions, but that's what complicates things even more. And so, I mean, I'm glad that we're working collaboratively in the first ring and the ESC around these issues, but it really takes, this is why it takes a statewide approach, because COVID doesn't know, if I'm in Cuyahoga County or Geauga County or Summit County. And we really do need to coordinate, and the challenges that we're seeing in Florida and Texas, I think, really speak to that.
Okay, so for the online school, so back in the spring, it was chaos and districts were scrambling to pull things together. How sure are you that each student and family are going to have the appropriate devices, internet access, and the know-how to use the devices for learning? What are each of you putting in place for that?
We were able to deliver devices to all our families in the fall. We already had that infrastructure up, and also were able to provide hotspots as needed. So that won't be as big of an obstacle for our district, luckily, just because we've been working on one-to-one for a while. So it helped us with that transition. The next step really is around professional development, training, and support for teachers as we implement it. We want to do it better than we did it in the spring, now that we have a longer runway to plan, so that we can have our curriculum aligned across the different structures we're offering.
Yeah, I think, in all honesty, the biggest issue for us, and we surveyed our parents, and I'm sure Elizabeth did too, the biggest issue we heard from parents, the biggest concern with the online approach was that, our teachers were everywhere. We tried to stream things through Google Classroom, but then, the reality is they were picking and choosing different apps and different websites, and it's no harm to our teachers, no fault of our teachers. We were, I've said this often, it was an experiment that was hatched under the worst possible conditions. But from that, we've had some data to gather and we've had some time to improve. And so we will be streamlined in how we approach that. The other piece that we heard from parents was some of the frustration with, in some areas, there was sort of the post and hope model. You posted the assignments and you hope the kids did them. And that's not really a model that we're going to subscribe to again. We also had many families that were still, or many teachers that were still engaging our students at a high level. So they were setting up the Zoom meetings, they were setting up the Google Classroom meetings. And so it's that type of model that we're driving to. And we've worked with our Teachers Association to develop really a clear expectation of what online instruction will look like, so that it is predictable, so that families know when to log in, and again, so that it's streamlined according to the data that our parents showed us that said, these are the things that didn't work.
So what things, well, to what extent were you able to track which students were actively participating in online classes after the shutdown? How many just blew it off? How many were doing it actively? And what lessons did you learn about what worked and didn't work that you're going to get rid of and add?
Yeah, we really tracked it through assignment completion. And I'll be honest, our high school struggled. We made our fourth quarter a pass fail, and that way really the only impact to your GPA was if you just blew it off. However, if students had passed 3 quarters already, or 3 marks including their exam, they didn't necessarily have to pass the fourth quarter, and the motivation waned. It did. We had too low of a percentage. Actually, our high schools were under 50% percentage in terms of actually completing assignments. So what we've done, and again, I referenced it in my last answer, it's not, you can't just post the assignments and hope students are going to complete them. It's got to be that active engagement. You've got to be, here's when you're going to log in, and here's what you're expected to do during this meeting. And yes, I mean, your teacher and we're online, but we're still going to connect, through a platform similar to what we're using here. Those are the lessons we learned. It cannot just be, here's the syllabus, good luck.
One of the things I was fascinated to learn, and this is in working with the principal of Noble Elementary School, Patrick Carpenter, we were talking about for our primary students, what were teachers finding in terms of kids that were struggling and how they did with the online learning. And it became clear that students who were really struggling, even if they were in the classroom, were hesitant to share if they were having a challenge with an academic content. It was only when there was follow-up one-on-one with the teacher where they were able to really kind of dig deep and explore where kids were having trouble, where they were able to get supports. In the same way, when you're in a live classroom, you have kids sometimes who will just be quiet, even if they're confused. You get that same dynamic on Zoom. In the summer, we launched an initiative with Springboard Collaborative, where they provide one-on-one training for students and their parents with a teacher coach to help build literacy skills. So we wouldn't have students in a big classroom, but they would get that one-on-one customized approach to address their literacy needs. So that's one thing that it's just difficult when you're live with a student. A teacher can sense if a student is challenged with a particular concept. That's really challenging in an online environment.
So are you going to grade kids normally?
We are.
Our grading practices, we did actually grade. We did grades. We had pass fail as one of our options along the spectrum, but we did do grades based on mastery. We'll take it back to our teacher committees and our administrator committees to refine what it's going to look like in the fall.
So what can you explain what you're doing with mastery?
So really looking if kids have mastered a specific content and giving them credit for mastering a particular standard as opposed to an overall grade in ELA 8 or ELA math or something like that. So a standards-based approach to instruction, which actually is one of, that's a new trend that we're seeing academically happening across districts, where we're moving away from traditional grading and really thinking about what do students really know and understand at the conclusion of the course or at the conclusion of the year.
Okay. So let's see, are there any particular supports anything in particular you really want the legislature or the feds to help you with? Not just dollars, but like any particular thing that you would want them to be able to fund for you. What's top on your wish list that would make your job easier?
Yeah, and I know you said not dollars, but this is sort of where this ends up inevitably going. Our concern right now is not hand sanitizer. It's not plexiglass. It's not we're going to have enough wipes on buses. Our honest concern is staffing. We, just finished collective bargaining agreements last summer. We had 3 years with the teachers, 3 years with our OPSI teams, which are classified teams. We're struggling to fill positions. And the reality is we're not offering a high enough salary to attract anyone to be a cleaner all of a sudden. It's $18,000 or $19,000 plus single benefits. And we put together, sort of a wish list of what staffing levels would look like, especially with COVID. And quite frankly, we're about 26 cleaners short. We have 4 positions that are current positions that we are unfilled. And then we have 22 more that we would love to fill just so that we have that continual sanitization going on. And here's an empty classroom. Let me, bring the 360 wands in and zap this classroom. And that's a larger question. I mean, that's not about getting us through COVID. That's about respecting public education again, and respecting the fact that, your communities and your schools need to work as one, and respecting the fact that, in urban districts, folks, we're doing borderline heroic work at times. And it certainly hasn't been the political tenor, hasn't followed that. In fact, it's been, as Elizabeth referenced before, how do we defund, these urban school districts where maybe the kids are going to fail anyway? So, why send the dollars that way? We need help, but again, it's a longer term prospect. It's where we can be competitive. It's where we can have, teaching, especially in urban areas, revered again, and instead of sort of, looked down upon. It's so that we can have a competitive rate with other school districts. Even, if our bus drivers can look down the hall or look down the road and see that, in Berea or Brooklyn, they can go make $3 an hour more, Parma's going to lose that fight in most families' minds. So, how can we in general just shift that tenor of what a public education is viewed as?
Yeah, I agree. More teachers, more social workers, more counselors, all positions that we had to cut this past spring, specifically money to help us combat summer learning loss, money to help us connect with each individual family to see what their needs are, supports to really track the academic progress and needs of all of our students. And unfortunately, none of those things are really free. And it's so critical because what we're doing right now as a state in this time is going to have lifelong impact, not only on our families and our communities, but the state of Ohio for sure. And so this is really a time for us to show and prove what we believe in and to understand the long-term investment that education is, especially now. I just worry about how we will be exacerbating the inequities within our systems because of this pandemic that is beyond anyone's control.
So how will you combat the learning loss from the shutdown? You've got kids who'll be way behind. How are you going to catch them up?
Yeah, we're looking at structures within our school day to provide additional supports for those students. We're even looking to see if there are places on those days where they are off of their blended learning cycle and not in school, where they can get additional supports either virtually or in other spaces within our community as well. We know we'll need to do things over the summer. We'll need to do things on the weekend once school gets back to its normal rhythm.
So this means tutoring, one-on-one, small groups?
In addition to supporting coaching parents around this work, because they are still going to be working with students, especially in the blended model, and really developing a system where we can really track and see the individual needs of a students. We're launching an initiative anyway that's going to allow us to really see the unique need of each of our families. And so this will be able to support and at least track the needs that the pandemic has also caused for our families and align our supports moving forward for students.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add to that, and certainly we're always looking for ways to, offer new and innovative ways to educate. But the one piece I would sort of add to that would be our teachers are aware that our students were off. And so, our teachers, we always, do those pre-assessments to make sure that we've got some type of, basic understanding of some concepts and some pieces of knowledge that are important for advancing in the next lesson. So pre-assessments or formative assessments are going to be especially critical given what we experienced last spring.
So what are you seeing in terms of teachers coming back and not willing to come back? And are you having a lack of substitutes available too? And so how are you going to staff your
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean,
we have all the substitutes in Cleveland Heights. Just come in. We have all of them.
all of them?
I don't know that I believe that, Elizabeth, but if
That's
you do,
not,
let's share.
it is not true.
Yes. Again, my number one concern going into the fall is staffing levels. We have teachers that are, for any given reason, very tentative about coming back. And, one option we're going to have is that they may become the teachers on the Parma Virtual Learning Academy,
Right.
but there's not going to be, one spot in PVLA and that's the virtual piece for all of the teachers who aren't comfortable. And so how do we make sure they're comfortable? And we're trying to answer all their questions. We're trying to work with them so that you have, that buy-in between our administration and our union, which we've been grateful that our union has been very, very progressive and very collaborative with us. But yes, on an individual level, then, you have the Families First Act, and I kind of butchered that, but the Families First Act really allows families to have some economic incentive to stay home. So if I can't find childcare because of COVID situations, now I can stay home and for the first 2 weeks, collect 100% of my salary. For the next 10 weeks, collect 66% of my salary. Now, if I don't have childcare expenses and I'm going to get 66%, there's almost economic incentive to stay home. So we're very concerned about staffing levels. It is going to require, the work to this point, and Elizabeth probably feels this way too, has been largely central office related. What's the structure going to look like? How do we get the resources in place? But I will say that as we shift now, as we have our model in place, our principals, this is going to be an extremely difficult time. There's going to have to be a lot of flexibility. They're going to be answering a million questions from our teachers and from our parents. And we've got great folks in those trenches. But, again, when the staffing level decreases, there's nothing to do but juggle kids and but, mix cohorts. And, yes, we want to be safe, but we also have to, have a supervisor in front of every child. So it's going to be a difficult proposition. We're preparing, for that from a mindset perspective. I wish we could say we've got some premium level of pay that we're going to, attach to extra cleaning jobs or substitute jobs. But again, that's not the reality. The reality is we've been okay financially to this point because of the CARES dollars, because of FEMA funding, which we've actually tapped into. But there isn't extra money to start, attaching hazard pay to what are essentially hazardous positions.
Okay. So each of you, what's your prediction or estimate of how many people will not want to come back to a live classroom?
Elizabeth, you want to take a stab at that? I don't.
Well, I think our numbers probably are similar. 25% or so had some hesitation just when we surveyed at the beginning of, more towards the beginning of the summer. I think the thing to know is that, things do change over time too. Teachers are watching the numbers just like everyone else, and that's going to impact their degree of comfort. So that could be even higher right now.
Okay, so you can't put 25%. I mean, you don't want 25% of your teachers teaching your online options, right? Or yes?
Well, ideally we match, right? I mean, that would be the best scenario.
We're hoping it matches, correct?
Yeah, and I think Elizabeth's right. And we didn't survey our teachers to see if you'd want to come back or not. We did survey our families, and like I said, we're already at 750, which is just under 10%. Maybe we're at 8% now. So I would say the teaching percentage is higher than that. But by the time August 3rd comes, when we finalize that lock-in for virtual, I think hopefully you see sort of an even match there.
Okay. Do you pay teachers that aren't willing to come back?
There's a difference between not willing and can't, and so that's something that we continue to work with our attorneys for. If teachers are quarantined, we are working, and sure, again, Cleveland Heights is doing the same, to provide some type of remote option for them so that they can actually project into their classrooms and really essentially still be running the class. But again, you've got to have a substitute in that classroom too. You can't just, have somebody supervising the class remotely and that's all. So that will be an option for for teachers that are, quarantined through no fault of their own. So there's sort of that differential between won't and can't and how we treat that.
Okay,
If there are
so
some teachers who really, who will need an accommodation, who really, it's not safe for them to teach in the current climate. And we're encouraging them to make sure that they follow up with their healthcare professionals in order to get that information to us so that we can take it through our HR protocols. That's really true. And it's important that that's something that we know and we, procedurally follow those safeguards for staff as well.
okay, so for the two legislators that we've left alone for a while, if you haven't fallen asleep or
Guys still there?
because we've abandoned you, are there things that you want the legislature to do to add extra to provide for districts to make things go easier before the school year starts or shortly after? What's high on your list?
Well, as I mentioned before, it's the, lifting the burden of the testing and those mandates on the school districts. They have enough to worry about outside of the report card and all those things. And I think that's something that's pretty common sense and something we're certainly able to do. The funding is such a confusing and fluid situation with all the federal funding coming in, state funding. Obviously, we want to provide as much resources as possible to school districts to implement these very difficult multiple options out there and very fluid situation where they could switch at any time. So the more, and that costs money. And I was just talking to my wife earlier today. She, I mentioned earlier, she's a Lakewood teacher. She was on one of the groups that, reopen how to reopen the school and substitute teachers is a huge issue for them. You think teachers are underpaid, substitute teachers are certainly underpaid. And, where teachers are being encouraged to stay home with any, rightfully so, with any symptom that might not be COVID-19 related, but those absences are going to increase a lot. And if you can't find, and teachers can't be covering multiple classrooms as easily as it maybe could pre-COVID-19. So, that's a big concern for me. If there's a way we can help out on that end, I think, that's something that we should be looking at.
Yeah, I agree. Watching the funding, relieving the burden of the testing out there, and just listening. Actually, this forum has been very good for me because both of the superintendents have raised issues that I was unaware of, and has educated me. But also listening. So I try to communicate with a number of teachers, both in the Lakewood as well as the Cleveland School District, as well as our state school board member, Merle Gordon, Merle Johnson, and listen to her and stay on top of what's going on and what is needed at the local level.
And I will say that the listening part that you brought up is a great point because I agree. ESC, we have monthly meetings with all of our superintendents in all of Lorraine County. Since COVID-19 hit, we've had weekly meetings every Friday via Zoom with our health commissioner and all of our superintendents. And at the beginning, the legislators on the call, 3 state reps and myself, we were adding a lot to it and sharing a lot of information. But by the end, it was them sharing information with us and us learning and us, listening to them. And, not everybody across the state is lucky enough to have that. So I would encourage all superintendents or teachers to reach out to their state reps, state senators. If we don't hear directly from you, sometimes we're not aware of issues that you're facing.
Okay, so back to the superintendents for a moment. So if a student or teacher suspects they have COVID or then is diagnosed with COVID, what happens?
So that's we know we're going to go through that, and we're working at some specific protocols, but the real protocol comes down to, there's no one answer on that. The Cuyahoga County Board of Health has been amazing. We had an incident in the spring where we had a staff member with COVID, and I'm sorry, but sometimes my experience with bureaucracies hasn't been the most positive in terms of actually getting to talk to somebody and getting answers back. And they were amazing and continue to be. And I don't know how many staff members they have or what kind of hours they're working, but they have given personalized instruction. They've given answers in a timely manner. And that's extremely reassuring for a superintendent, because I'm not the medical expert. I'm not someone that, has my degree in public health. I'm an educator. And so to be able to talk to those folks who do have that expertise, that's really where we're getting our guidance. The one piece that has been very clear is, we're not going to ever be able to require a negative test before we return someone to school. Mm-hmm. So, this really is one of those all in it together type of propositions where we have to depend upon families to be honest. I mean, if there's symptoms in the morning, don't send your child to school. And we know, and Elizabeth probably hears the stories too of, families that send kids in last year with, the flu, and that's going to, that level of concern is really going to be heightened this year. We have to ask our families to be honest. But again, to answer your question, it's that immediate phone call from our nursing supervisor to the Cuyahoga County Board of Health, and just very, very grateful for the assistance that they've provided.
Well, we actually had a situation this summer where one of our student athletes tested positive. And as Charlie said, it definitely is a case-by-case basis that we make those decisions, but really led by the guidance of the physicians. And so those students that student was in close contact with, and the Board of Health has specific guidelines on what close contact means. That information was given to them. They did follow-up contact with those students to determine whether or not there was a need to quarantine and what the next steps are. And so once you get a positive test, there are some protocols that immediately do go into place. When you look at CDC guidance on it, and again, it's guidance. So the CDC doesn't say if you get a positive test in your school, shut down. It doesn't say that. It suggests a shutdown of perhaps 2 to 5 days. But again, there's that flexibility based on the context of the particular situation in the school.
Okay. So what about special education students? How are you gonna handle them? Are they all going to be coming in? Are they going to be doing things remotely? How are you dividing who comes in and who doesn't? And how are you going to provide services to them?
We are working on some protocols that will identify students that will come in all 4 of our days. We haven't finalized that, but you can anticipate that students with some of our more severe disabilities would be those who would qualify within that realm. We recognize that there's going to be students with disabilities that would prefer to stay home, and we will work with their case managers. We will have intervention specialists assigned to our virtual academy. We know that IEPs clearly spell out the program and the educational needs of a child. Special education is not a place per se, it's a service, and so we will be committed to providing those services. But yes, there'll be some flexibility on some students that will come in 4 days, different from their non-disabled peers.
Very similar, aligned to the IEPs of the students. That's what we're doing.
Okay, so, but there's a lot of in-person things that's supposed to happen in the IEPs. You'll make those happen?
Yeah, we will. I mean, there'll be particular protocols that we have in place. Oftentimes the students that have the highest need already have very low student ratios in those classrooms, and there are staff. So we'll be paying attention to the distancing requirements, but also making sure that staff have what they need in order to serve and meet the needs of students. It's going to get tricky. So, and it's not, there's some things that will be very difficult to do from 6 feet away for students. And so we'll really have to look at those services and supports and work with families on those pieces. There's also science around how long, if you're 15 minutes or certain time periods as well. So we'll try to do, to use all those guidelines as we move forward.
If I can add something too, where we struggled the most in the spring, and it's taking the most creativity, isn't necessarily with the instruction. It's with physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. It's those folks are really, having to be creative in how they can deliver those services virtually if we need to.
So kids are going to be coming back with having fallen behind academically. Some of them may also need some emotional or social help. So what are you putting in place to help them adjust back? What kind of training are you providing teachers to help them adjust?
I think it's your turn to lead off there, Ms.
Yeah,
Kirby.
I'll start there. We know that part of our professional learning for our teachers will be just how do you support the social emotional learning needs of students. If there's any time that we all have experienced trauma. It's now. So making sure that we have that training for teachers around how to help students deal with trauma, how to help staff deal with trauma, because they also would have experienced that as well. And, you know, we're lucky we have a team of social workers and counselors who have been putting together plans even from the fall moving forward to support those needs for students. As I mentioned before, we do have a post-secondary planning system that we're going to be using to collect information on each family and their needs, and to connect those needs to either an outside provider or the resources within the district to help support students through this time, especially around the social emotional support.
So is the training you're giving the teachers about this just a professional development day before the start of the year, significant training? How different is that from a typical year?
But when you do trauma-informed training well, it really becomes a part of the pedagogy that a teacher uses when they work with students. And so we'll certainly start by introducing that at the beginning of the year as we're working with students, but also, working with staff, but we'll be integrating that throughout, because we will need ongoing professional learning and training to integrate this as a part of our practice.
Okay, so is that a new thing for you guys?
We've done some trauma training in the past, and quite frankly, it's something that teachers really have said they found useful and wanted more of. And then the pandemic hit, and so it makes sense to continue to make sure that that's incorporated in what we're doing, training our staff as they work with students.
Is every teacher going to get that, or just some?
Well, that's something that's going to be important for kids, all kids K to 12. So I can't tell you the specific professional development schedule to the point, but we know it's a priority that as many teachers as possible get that, because it's going to be important practice. Each and every one of our students has experienced trauma with COVID-19 this year, and we'll have to make sure staff have tools to start to help kids work some of this out as they integrate back into instruction and back into the classroom.
We also have worked with trauma-informed practices in the classroom, and will continue to do so. We also adopted this year, and this was a little bit of a sort of a difference in practice that we've changed. We formally adopted a social emotional curriculum for elementary schools being second step, and so we're going to make sure that we provide the professional development behind those resources and those materials, and make sure that it's actually scheduled. Too many times, some of those soft skills that we look at as maybe secondary to academics, sort of get swept under the rug, so to speak. We have to make sure that we make it a priority, and the way you make it a priority is by scheduling it and providing professional development for it. And so both of those things will be accurate, or plans, I should say. The frustration we have, again, and I'm sorry to continue to bemoan this fact, but the frustration we have is the lack of available substitutes. We have gone to not doing any professional development during the day this year. That's a challenge for us, because last year we had really robust professional development during the school day. So, we could have teacher-based teams collaborating and working together on curriculum items, or, a pedagogical piece, but we know that it's really all hands on deck within the schools this year. So we're going to have to be flexible and creative in terms of using staff meetings to provide some of that professional development that we're going to lose out on.
I mean, we talked a little bit about subs earlier. I mean, are you going to not have enough?
Yes, I'm concerned. I mean, we're gonna have enough, folks to supervise children. Certainly, I mean, we're not gonna leave students unattended, and we're not gonna, risk that. But to say that we have enough subs to run a good professional development schedule, that's not going to be realistic. And quite frankly, I think we're going to be juggling. Instead of a substitute in classrooms, I think you're going to see period subs where a teacher on their planning period takes over, for that teacher who's absent. What that does, unfortunately, is create burnout. Teachers come to work expecting a lunch and expecting a planning period. When you have to take one of those away from teachers, you're going to increase the stress level, you're going to increase the fatigue, especially given the fact that you've got, already a heightened sense of sensitivity. So it is a concern. It's not something that's going to prevent us from delivering instruction. We're committed to the models that we've adopted, but yes, we're going to have to be very creative in the fall.
Okay. So is anything positive come out of all this?
I will say, from a positive standpoint, first let me say this. The state and the federal nutrition assistant programs have been amazing. As our families pull in, and we feed approximately 700 students on Wednesdays and Fridays, and it's sort of a drive-through line. I want to make sure I publicly thank our cafeteria folks. You know, they've been on those front lines, not knowing who's pulling through, not knowing what the, you know, this is long before there was a level system. They've been really engaged through the snow and the sleet of March, through the, 97-degree, humid days of distributing food to really as many people as we can. And so that's really been a real positive for us. The other positive, I think that folks understand how hard it is to really provide a quality education. I think that, families who all of a sudden were, at home with their children and sort of, trying to motivate them, trying to cajole them, trying to, have some of that intricate knowledge of how to actually instruct them. I think it really shined a light on how difficult and noble our profession is. And as I, spoke of before, I think that was important. I think it continues to be important. Our teachers have hard jobs and should be really revered, not looked down upon. And I think that this has helped that process.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with how quickly our teachers were able to pivot to provide a different style of education to students that no one planned for. We've seen a lot of great creative things coming out of that. Many of us have learned really new skills. There's been a lot of flexibility and openness to that as well. We know some students really thrived actually in remote learning and distance learning. So there are really important lessons to learn around that and what elements of that work well and how we can incorporate that into instruction when we come out of the pandemic. But quite frankly, there are some things that we've learned and we've been starting to use that I'm sure we'll continue to use and will help advance the profession moving forward, especially technology and how it can be something that really helps facilitate education for students. Similarly, just heroes all across staff positions, folks have really jumped in. We fed over 200,000 meals in the spring and continue to do that in the summer. We've had community partners come in and provide free food, boxes of produce every Thursday at our high school to anyone in the state of Ohio. And there's been so many folks and families and teachers and parents and principals who said, whatever you need me to do to help, will help. And that's been really, really encouraging and inspiring as we move forward. I really think you see the character of an organization in a crisis. And many of our districts across the state of Ohio just really have stepped up to meet the crisis. And that's been impressive and gives me hope.
Okay, and the legislators, anything positive that you guys have seen come out of this?
Very similar to what the superintendent said. I wrote down a couple notes here. Technology. Kids learn differently. I was just talking to an attorney that has kids in Cuyahoga County School, and the kid that excelled with in-person classes and everything struggled at home, but the other child really excelled doing things with technology. So teachers are fantastic, and now that maybe technology is a little bit easier for some of these students to access, they can use that to their benefit. My sister has 3 little ones. Has never been so appreciative of teachers before. So, she's been thanking, my wife and all of her kids' teachers for all the hard work they put in under these trying times. And as I said before, we've talked about local control, and how the school districts know what's best for them. And so hopefully that will really show true here, and in Columbus we'll realize that, hey, all this testing and all these report cards and the 3rd grade reading guarantee and everything, let's put a little bit more power into the school districts and have the state as a resource, and we're there to help, but not to have these mandates there. So hopefully that will also be coming out of this.
I just want to add that I think with our teachers and our school staff, we've been able to see schools and teachers able to adapt in very quickly changing circumstances. The other thing that's very noticeable is the engagement of families in education again with their children or grandchildren or brothers or sisters. I think we rely historically too much on our schools to provide that education, and I think this virus and having kids at home more and trying to learn at home more have engaged families in the education process a lot more. And the thing is, how can we expand that to those that don't know what to do at home with their kids in the education process? And how can we, as we move forward, even after the virus, keep that engagement in place?
Okay, so that was turned out to be a pretty good question to wrap most things up. But I do want to give each of you a chance. If there's something that you felt was really important that you wanted to mention or that you feel like people should know about, please feel free to jump in and just offer something quick here before we call it a wrap.
The one piece, first of all, thank you for the forum. I think it's always important to tell our story to whoever's willing to listen. And I'm watching the participants number, and it's great that we had as good a participation as possible. I really appreciate Representative Skindell and Senator Manning. Thank you for your time and your willingness to listen. I mean, we understand this too, and I know a lot of this came across as pleas for funding and some of the issues we're facing. We know that they're facing issues too. We know that there's not some magic box where they can just, oh, okay, well, here's some money, you can take this. And we appreciate that our entire community is trying to rally together to do the best we can. And I think provided we have the mindset, what I told our staff is, perfection is impossible. Compassion is mandatory. And I think the more that we can operate with that in mind, I think the better we will have in terms of a positive opening for our students.
Yeah, and I think that this is really showing us how important education is and the true purpose of education. And I would hope that as we move forward, legislators really keep that in mind as new bills are proposed and really understand the unique needs across the state. Sometimes I have a sense that it's hard to get heard in Northeast Ohio. It's hard to get heard in the urban core. And so the fact that you gentlemen are listening, our legislators are always in contact with us also are really, really important. I look forward to being able to come back down to Columbus to talk about our unique experiences here and to offer specific suggestions so that we can really provide a quality, enriching education for our students that will ultimately truly benefit and enrich the state in many, many ways. This is not a time for us to be fighting. This is a time for us to be coordinating and listening and developing common solutions, which is what we have to do right now, even within our own districts.
Okay. So thank you for the folks at Case Western Reserve University for co-sponsoring this forum. And thank you to all of the panelists who came on and spent time here tonight. Thank you also to all the folks who came on and offered great questions to me as the evening went on. Again, my name is Patrick O'Donnell. I'm a reporter for the education news site, the74million.org. I'm happy to hear from folks with concerns and questions or comments about schools. And I'm really interested in seeing what happens going forward, because this is going to be a very interesting fall. Thank you, everybody, and I appreciate all your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see you again, Patrick.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Have a great
Bye all.